For 6 years, Nora Calloway carried the weight of one night she could not undo. She believed she had let her father die. She believed she was guilty. She was wrong, and the proof had been sitting in a locked drawer 3 miles away the entire time, written in the hand of the man who put it there. This is how she found out, and what she did next. She stood on the church steps with no shoes on her feet and a tin box pressed against her chest, and she read the numbers out loud. Not because she was asked to, not because anyone had given her permission. She read them because 6 years of silence had finally cost more than speaking ever could. The square was packed. 50 people, maybe more, standing in the July heat with their Sunday clothes already going dark at the collar. And every one of them was looking at the woman who, according to the most powerful man in Dustfield, Texas, had burned her own father alive in his sleep. Her voice did not shake. That is where this story ends. But to understand what it cost her to stand there, what it cost all of them, you need to go back 5 days. Back to a dry riverbed, a dying man, and the woman who had every reason to keep walking and did not. This is the story of Nora Calloway, a woman abandoned by the silence of an entire town, hunted on her own land, and left to carry a guilt that was never hers to carry. In the next 90 minutes, you will watch her go from a woman who stitched her window shut with needle and thread to a woman who stood before the people who broke her and made them listen. One more thing before we begin. When Warren Dade handed Nora that ultimatum, he gave her 7 days to sign over her land or face his judge in a courtroom he controlled. That was 6 days ago. The clock, as you will come to understand, was never really on her side. It started with vultures. 3 of them on a dead horse patient, the way only things that feed on death can be patient. They had already made their calculation. The man face down in the cracked mud of the Pecos riverbed was close enough to barn to finish that waiting seemed reasonable. Nora Calloway saw them from the ridge above. She had come for water. The creek on her property ran shallow in July, and the dry bend of the Pecos sometimes pooled in the shade of the limestone shelf. She came alone the way she did everything. Water jug on her hip, flour sack tied over the mouth to keep the dust out. She stood at the edge and looked down at the man. Blue work shirt so faded it had gone the color of an old sky. Brown leather vest, the kind a man wears until it shapes itself to him, until taking it off feels like leaving something behind. Both of them dark with road dust and dried sweat, the vest torn at the right shoulder where something had caught it hard. She could see the rise of his back, shallow. But there, she kicked his boot. Nothing. Kicked again. His fingers curled once in the dirt, then went still. She set the jug down, dropped to one knee, and rolled him over. His face was burned raw, lips split and white at the edges, eyes swollen shut like fists. A gash above his left ear gone black and crusted in the heat. Whoever this man was, he had used up most of what he had just getting this far. The vultures shifted on the horse. She looked at them. Then she looked at the man. Then she grabbed him under both arms and started pulling. 103 degrees, no shade, no one watching. The riverbed was a quarter-mile of broken hardpan that sucked at her boots with every step, and the man weighed more than any dead weight she had ever tried to move. She was 5 feet and 4 inches of wire and stubbornness, and she dragged him the way a woman drags something when she has already decided it is going to happen, and her body is just obligated to agree. She talked the whole way. Not to him exactly. More at the general situation. You better not die on me. I did not drag you this far to dig a hole in this heat. Ground is too hard anyway, and I would feel bad about it for at least a week, which I do not have time for. She paused to get her grip. Besides, the vultures already look satisfied, and I will not give them the satisfaction. He groaned. Good, she said. Keep doing that. She got him inside before sundown. The shack sat on 40 acres at the edge of everything, the kind of place that looks like it lost an argument with the land and decided to stay anyway out of spite. 1 room, 1 cot, a stove with a cracked burner, a window covered with a flour sack because the glass had been taken out by a thrown rock 3 months ago, and the merchant in Dustfield had declined to sell her a replacement. She laid him on the cot and went to work. Cleaned the gash above his ear with the whiskey she kept for emergencies, which this qualified as. Pressed a wet rag to his face. Worked water between his cracked lips. Slow, a few drops at a time, the way you water something you are not sure will take. He tried to open his eyes somewhere around the 2nd hour. Don't, she said. Son cooked you. Give it a day. He tried to sit up. She put one hand flat on his chest. Not rough, just done arguing. You have heat stroke, she said. You have not had water in at least 2 days. You have a cut on your head that probably needs stitching, but I am not a doctor, so you are getting whiskey in a clean rag and you are going to lay still. He laid still. She held the cup to his mouth again. He drank, cough steadied. I know how to drink water, he said. His voice came out like something dragged over gravel. She looked at him. You were face down in a dry riverbed with buzzards on your horse. She handed him the cup again. I am not convinced you know how to do much of anything. He almost smiled. Then he went back to sleep. She read his papers while he slept because she needed to know if someone was coming to collect him. His name was in a discharge document folded into the breast pocket of the brown leather vest. He had not taken the vest off even in the heat, which told her something about the man before he ever opened his eyes again. Colt Rains, Fort Wallace, Kansas, discharged honorably, widowed. That last word sat alone on the page like it was embarrassed to be there. The second night the fever came. He shook hard enough to rattle the cot frame against the plank floor. Nora sat beside him and changed the cold rag on his forehead every 20 minutes, and she talked in the low, steady voice she used when the silence in the shack got heavy enough to press on her chest. Her father used to say that fever was just the body burning off what did not belong. She paused, wringing the rag out over the basin. He said a lot of things that turned out to be wrong, so take that for what it is worth. Colt muttered something. Broken words. Then a name. Ada. Nora stopped wringing the rag. Ada, he said again. His hand reached for something that was not there, fingers searching the air above him. The baby. She caught his hand, held it without thinking about it. She is not here, she said quietly. But you are. Stay here. He gripped her fingers hard enough to hurt. She did not pull away. The fever broke before dawn. By the third morning, he could sit up and speak without his voice sounding like it was coming from the bottom of a well. Colt Rains, he said. I know. I read your papers. She poured coffee, thin and barely brown, but hot. Colt Rains, Fort Wallace, discharged widowed. She handed him the cup. That cover it? He took the coffee, looked at it for a while. Had a wife, he said finally. And a boy. Did not even get to name him before the cholera took them both. Same week, he drank. That was 2 years ago. I have been moving since. Moving where just moving. Nora understood that. She understood it the way you understand something you have lived rather than something you have learned. Well, she said, you stopped moving for now. Drink your coffee. He looked around the shack for the first time in the full light of day. Noticed the flour sack nailed over the window. The way the nails were placed, the stitching along the torn edge. Someone had repaired that sack more than once. That happened often, he asked. She picked up the mug she had left on the stove. Often enough. He looked at the sack, looked at her hands, said nothing else. That afternoon, he was strong enough to sit on the edge of the bomb, and she told him about Dustfield. Not because she owed him the story, because he asked a direct question, and she had learned years ago that answering straight was easier than watching a man draw his own conclusions. Warren Dade, she said, owns the grain warehouse, holds debt on every farm within 15 miles, bought the notes from the bank in Abilene when the drought hit 2 years running, and now every family that cannot pay, he owns them. And you? She set her cup down. I do not owe him a cent. This land belonged to my father. 40 acres paid in cash, no mortgage, no note. When he died, it passed to me, legal and clean. She paused. Right in the middle of it runs a creek, Cowboy Creek. Only water source in this valley that does not dry up in a drought year. He wants the water. He wants everything, she said. But the water is what keeps him up at night. He controls the north well in town and charges families by the barrel. But the creek on my land is open water, free water. If anyone figured out they could run pipe from my land to their farms, Dade's hold on this county would break overnight. She looked at the stitched flour sack on the window. So instead, he spent 6 years making sure no one would side with me. There was a moment of quiet. The kind that ask a question without words. She answered it anyway. 6 years ago, she said my father's barn caught fire. 3 horses died. My father was inside. He had been drinking. He was dead before morning. Dade told the town that I said it. She said it flat, no heat in it, the way a woman says something she has said so many times it has gone smooth. And the town believed him because Dade said it, and in Dustfield what Dade says might as well come down from a mountain carved in stone. Did you said it? No, she did not offer anything more than that. And the way she said it was not the sound of someone defending themselves. It was the sound of someone who had been defending themselves for so long they had stopped needing to. Colt was quiet for a moment. Then he said he needed to go into town for supplies and medicine. She told him not to. He went anyway. Dustfield was the kind of quiet that comes from everyone watching without wanting to be seen doing it. Colt tied the mule outside Alderman's general store, walked in, put coins on the counter, and asked for bandages, salve, and quinine. The man behind the counter looked at the coins, then at Colt, then at something behind Colt that was not there. "You staying out at the Calloway place," the man said. It was not a question. "I am buying supplies," Colt said. "We do not serve friends of Nora Calloway." Colt looked at the man for a long moment. Then he picked up his coins and walked out. Did not slam the door, did not need to. He tried the saloon. Same answer. The doctor's office had its curtain drawn and its lock turned. Dustfield had one message for anyone connected to Nora Calloway, and it delivered that message with silence, which is the kind that takes the longest to stop hearing. He was untying the mule when the boy appeared. 13, maybe, thin the way children get when meals are unreliable. Eyes that had seen more than 13 years had any right to hold. He was wearing boots with one sole flapping loose, held on with a piece of knotted twine, and he walked like someone who had spent a long time learning to take up as little space as possible. "Mister." Colt turned. The boy glanced over his shoulder. "Quick practiced. You looking for medicine?" "Who is asking Kip Malloy? I work the stable for Mr. Dade." He stepped closer, dropped his voice to just above the wind. "I can get you what you need." "Why would you do that?" The boy looked down at his boots. Then he looked up. "Miss Calloway," he said. "Last winter I did not eat for 3 days because Mr. Dade cut my rations." She found out. She walked 2 miles in the cost and left cornbread and a wool blanket outside the stable door. Never knocked, never asked for anything back. He swallowed. "Nobody ever did something like that for me before." Colt studied the boy for a moment. "You bring me those supplies and you keep your head down. Do not let Dade's people see you doing it." "Yes, sir." The boy dissolved into the space between buildings like he had practiced disappearing. Colt found him 40 minutes later at the old cottonwood past the creek fork. Kid had the medicine in a canvas bag, and his hands were steadier than they had any right to be. They were walking back toward the mule when they heard the noise from the square. Not ordinary noise, the other kind. The kind that forms when a group of people stops being individual people and becomes something else, something older and uglier that moves together without deciding to. Colt came around the corner of the feed store and stopped. He saw the crowd first. 40, maybe 50 people spread across the square in the full afternoon heat. Then the wagon. Then the woman roped to the axle with her wrists bound and her feet bare on the scorched ground, dress torn at the shoulder, a bruise already swelling dark beneath her left eye. Nora Calloway was standing straight, not kneeling, not slumped. Her chin was up and her eyes were fixed on a point in the middle distance, and her mouth was a flat, quiet line. In front of her stood a man in a clean linen suit and a hat that cost more than most families in this county made in a month. He was holding a leather-bound ledger in one hand and a riding crop in the other, and he was speaking to the crowd the way a man speaks when he has never once been interrupted in his life. "Warren Dade, she has stolen from every honest family in Dustfield," he was saying. "From every one of you, from your children. She tampered with my records, my own ledger, and she will answer for it." Colt did not shout. He did not need to. Who did this? 3 words, not a question, the kind of sentence that has already decided on its answer and is waiting for the room to catch up. It cut through the crowd noise the way a blade cuts through rope, clean and without effort, and the entire square went quiet. 50 heads turned. Dade stopped talking. Nora's eyes found Colt, and what he saw in them was not pain, not fear. It was shame, the deep, corroding kind. The shame of being seen in chains by someone who had seen you whole. Something moved in his chest at that, something he had not felt move in 2 years, something he had assumed was gone. He dismounted, walked forward, slow, every step a sentence. This is none of your business, Stranger Dade said. His voice was practiced and smooth, the voice of a man who had made a profession of sounding reasonable. A woman is roped to a wagon in the middle of town, Colt said, and not one person here has the decency to cut her loose. That makes it my business. She is a thief and a liar. She had a hearing. He kept walking. Past Dade, past the crowd, straight to Nora. He pulled his knife and cut the rope. The crowd pulled in a single breath. Nora's wrist came free. Raw bleeding pressed against her chest. She did not run, did not move, just stood. Colt took off his coat, the brown leather vest staying where it was, the blue of his shirt going bright in the afternoon light, and set the coat over her shoulders. Quiet. The way you cover something you know the value of. Dade's face had gone the color of old clay. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. Maybe, Colt said. He turned to the sheriff. Sheriff Cass Pruitt stood at the edge of the crowd near the church wall, arms folded, eyes on the ground. Colt looked at him. You see this woman's wrists? He kept his voice even. You see that bruise? You planning on doing your job today? Or are you just holding up that wall? Pruitt's jaw tightened. His eyes came up, then went back down. He said nothing. Colt turned to the crowd. 5 days ago, he said I was face down in a dry riverbed with vultures on my horse. This woman dragged me out of that riverbed in 100-degree heat. She gave me water and food and did not ask my name, did not ask if I was worth saving. He let that settle. I come into your town and find her tied like an animal, and you are all just watching. Wind moved through the square, dust lifted and fell. Colt looked at Nora. Come on, he said low enough that only she could hear. We are leaving. They will come for you now, she said. You know that. Yes, ma'am. Why? He looked at her, and she saw something behind his eyes that had nothing to do with courage. Something broken. Something that recognized her. Because the last time I should have stood up for somebody, I did not. He said, and she died anyway. Nora did not ask who. She did not need to. He helped her onto the mule and walked beside her through the crowd. Not fast, not slow. The pace of a man who had stopped running from anything the day he put his wife and son in the ground. Nobody stopped them. Dade watched them go, the riding crop bending slowly in his fist. Kip Malloy crouched behind the water trough at the edge of the square canvas bag pressed to his chest, watching everything. The first mile, neither of them spoke. Heat and dust and the sound of the mule's hooves on the packed earth. Grasshoppers rattling in the dead brush on both sides of the road. Then Nora said, You should not have done that. I know. I am serious. You cut me loose in front of 50 people. In front of Dade. You called out the sheriff. I know what I did. Then you know what is coming. He kept walking. Miss Calloway, he said after a moment, I buried a wife and a child. I have been shot twice, once by someone I thought was a friend. I spent 4 years in the cavalry watching men do things I still cannot talk about after dark. So when you tell me what is coming, I hear you. But I need you to understand that I have already been through the worst thing that was ever going to happen to me. It already happened. Everything after is just weather. She was quiet for a long moment. That is either the bravest thing I have ever heard, she said, or the most foolish. Probably both, he said. Probably both. Back at the shack, she cleaned her wrists by the light of the oil lamp hissing once through her teeth when the whiskey hit the raw rope burns. Colt sat on the porch facing the road, his back against the wall, his eyes on the place where the track bent and disappeared into the brush. That first evening, he asked her the question she had been waiting 6 years for someone to ask. You said Dade has been at this for 6 years, he said, and you have never done anything about it. She came to the doorway. The lamplight fell across her face and made the bruise under her eye look older than it was. I tried, she said. 2 years ago. He waited. There was a town meeting, she said. February of '81. I stood up. I had papers. I was ready. She paused. Dade let me get 3 words out. Then he nodded at Sid Crow, his man, and Crow walked out and came back with Kit Malloy. 13 years old. Crow held him by the collar in the middle of the road in front of 40 people, and he put a knife against that boy's throat. Dade did not say a word. He did not have to. Nora looked at her hands. The lamplight caught the faint white lines of old scars on her palms. I sat down, she said, and I have been sitting down ever since because every time I thought about standing up again, I thought about that boy, and I sat back down. Colt said nothing for a moment. Does Kit know that? No. She shook her head. He has no idea. He thinks I am afraid of Dade. And I suppose in a way I am, but not for myself. She went back inside. Colt watched the road and turned this over in his mind. The way a man turns a stone to see what is living under it. 2 days later, he understood the rest of it. He had asked her how Kit had managed to copy Dade's ledger records without anyone noticing, and she had given him the beginning of an answer, then gone quiet in a way that told him there was more she had not said. He waited. It came out slowly, the way true things come out when someone has been holding them for a long time. Last winter, she said, Kit was surviving on whatever Dade threw his way, which in January was not much. I found out. She looked at the table. I left food outside the stable, cornbread jerky, and I left some books. She paused. I had started doing it before that, leaving books for him. A primer, a reading workbook that had been my mother's. You taught him to read. I left books, she said. He taught himself. Colt looked at her. Did you know he was going into Dade's office? She shook her head. No, I knew he worked in the building. I knew he could read better than Dade ever suspected. She pressed her lips together. He came to me 3 months ago. Said he had seen something in the records and asked if he should copy it down. I told him no. I told him it was too dangerous. He did it anyway. She nodded. There was a long silence. He is 13 years old, she said finally, and he decided on his own. And I did not know, and I would have stopped him if I had, and it terrifies me that I am grateful he did not listen. Colt leaned back against the doorframe. You gave him something, he said. You gave him enough to read and enough to care. What he did with it is on him. She looked at him in the way of someone who wants to believe something and is waiting to see if the believing will hold. What Dade wants, Colt said. Tell me the whole of it. Not the story he is selling, what he actually wants. The land, she said, the 40 acres. Because of the creek. He wants to dam Callaway Creek. Build a controlled water system he can charge the whole county for. He already told the town council and Comstock that he was planning an irrigation project. He has the designs drawn. She looked at the lamp. He just needs my land first, and you will not sell. She looked at him with an expression that was past tired of explaining itself. This was my father's land, she said. He paid for it with 20 years of work. He is buried on it. And whatever happened between him and me, she stopped. Whatever happened, that land is the only thing left in this world that cannot be taken from me unless I hand it over myself. Colt nodded. Then we hold it, he said. She said nothing, but something in her face shifted. Something small and careful, like a door opening an inch to let in light it had not expected. That evening, Nora told him the piece she had never told anyone. Not the piece about the fire, not the simple version, the one she had rehearsed until it lost its shape. The real piece. The one she had carried so long she had stopped noticing the weight of it, the way you stop noticing the weight of your own skin. My father was not a good man by the end, she said. He drank. And when he drank, he was not the man I had known before my mother died. She kept her eyes on her hands. The night of the fire we had argued. He followed me to the barn. She stopped. The lantern was hanging on the hook by the stall, she said. He grabbed for my arm and it fell. Just fell. The glass broke. The hay caught. She raised her palms to the light. Old scars, white and faint against weathered skin. I tried to put it out, she said. I burned my hands. I ran for water. It was already too late. She paused for a long time. But there is something I have never said out loud, something I have carried for 6 years. She looked at him. There was 1 second, she said, 1 second before I moved. When the hay caught and the flames went up, there was 1 second where I just stood there, not thinking, not deciding, just standing. Because I was 18 years old and I was terrified and I was tired, and for 1 second I did not move. Just 1 second. And then I screamed and grabbed the water and ran, but it was already too late, and I have spent 6 years wondering if that 1 second makes me the reason he is dead. Colt was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Nora. She looked up. A man who raises his hand to his daughter does not get to be a victim. A lantern that falls during a beating is not a murder weapon. And 1 second where you were 18 years old and scared and worn through, that does not make you guilty of anything except being human. Her jaw moved once. She locked it down. You really believe that, she said. I do not believe it, he said. I know it. She picked up her coffee cup. Her hands were steady. Her eyes were not. They sat on the porch until the stars were fully out and the night sounds had settled into their rhythms. The creek insects, the dry grass, moving a barn owl calling somewhere in the darkness over the willows. It was the kind of quiet that two people build together, without meaning to, without even noticing they are building it until it is already there. Nora broke it once near midnight. Colt, yeah, thank you, for today, for not looking away. He nodded without turning. For the fence post too, she added. You did not have to do those. Fence has been leaning since before you lost the window glass, he said. Now it is not. She almost laughed. Caught it. Get some sleep, she said. Yes, ma'am. She disappeared inside. He stayed on the porch watching the road. Somewhere in Dustfield, Warren Dade was sitting behind a polished desk beneath an oil lamp, looking at a ledger he kept locked in the left drawer, figuring out how to crush two people who did not have the good sense to be afraid of him. And on the porch of a shack at the edge of 40 acres of dry grass and free-running water, a man who had spent 2 years trying to outride a grave in Nebraska was discovering, slow as water finding cracks in limestone, that he had found something worth staying for. He did not say it out loud. He was not ready for that. But when the light in the shack went dark and the breathing inside went slow and even, Colt Raines leaned back against the wall in his blue work shirt and brown leather vest and watched the road and did not think about Ada for the first time in 2 years. He thought about the 7 days, 6 of them left now, and the road stayed empty and the stars turned overhead, and Dustfield sat 3 miles east like a held breath waiting to let go. He was already fixing the fence when she woke up. She heard the hammer before she opened her eyes. 3 strikes, pause, 3 more, the sound of a man who knows what he is doing and is not in any hurry to prove it. She lay on the cot for a moment and listened to it, and there was something about the regularity of it, the simple evidence of another person working on the same patch of ground she had been working alone for 6 years, that she did not know what to do with. She got up, started the stove, put the coffee on. When she brought a cup out to him, he was at the east fence line, crouched beside a post that had been leaning at a 40-degree angle for longer than she cared to admit. He had already reset it in fresh dug earth and was tamping the dirt around the base with the heel of his boot, methodical and unhurried. He looked up when she came near, took the cup. You did not have to do this, she said. He drank, looked at the post. Fence has been leaning so long, it probably forgot what straight felt like. She crossed her arms. That a criticism? That is an observation. He handed the cup back and picked up the hammer. How long has the well rope been gone? Since April. He looked at her. I have been hauling by hand, she said before he could ask. I manage. He nodded, not the nod of someone agreeing, the nod of someone filing information away for later use. Then he went back to the fence. She stood there another moment, not sure whether to be grateful or annoyed, and settled on something between the two that she did not have a word for. Then she went back to the bean patch, and she did not think about the fact that someone was out there working. She thought about it anyway. By mid-morning, he had the fence straight and was at the well with a length of rope she had not seen him find. She watched him work the pulley housing, testing it, clearing the grit that had worked into the joint over months of disuse. His hands moved with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years doing physical work without thinking much about it, the ease of a man who had been more useful than decorative for the whole of his life. The brown leather vest was dark at the shoulders where the sweat had soaked through. He did not take it off. She brought him water and went back to the bean patch. That afternoon, she asked him how he took his coffee, and he said, however it comes, and she said, that is not an answer. And he almost smiled and said, black then, if it matters that much to you. It does not matter to me in the least, she said. She made it black. They ate at the small table near the stove, the kind of meal that is more about having somewhere to put your hands than about the food itself, salt pork beans, cornbread from the morning. Outside, the heat had settled into the serious business of afternoon, and the grasshoppers were making their relentless noise in the dead grass beyond the fence line. I need to go to Hayes City, Colt said. She looked at him. Judge Harlan Cross sits circuit out of Hayes City, he said. I know the name. Good reputation. The kind of judge who actually reads what he is given. He set his fork down. Whatever Kid has in those copied pages, it needs to get in front of someone who cannot be bought by Dade. A judge in his own county is no good to you. Cross is outside Dade's reach. Hayes City is 3 days' ride. He nodded. You would be gone a week. He nodded again. Nora put her hands flat on the table. She looked at them for a moment. She was aware of something shifting in her chest, something she had not felt shift in a long time, and she did not like the feeling of it because she knew what it meant, and she was not prepared for what it meant. Dade will not wait a week, she said. He said 7 days. He said 7 days so we would relax. He will move in 3, maybe 2. Colt was quiet. She kept her eyes on the table. I have been alone here for 6 years, she said. I know how to be alone. I am not asking you to stay. I am telling you what will happen when you leave. I know, he said. She looked up. I know what will happen, he said. And I am still going because a judge is the only thing that ends this. In a way, it actually stays ended. Crow and hired men you can face down once, maybe twice. But Dade has money and Dade has patience, and he has been working this particular problem for 6 years. The only thing that stops a man like that is the law applied by someone he cannot get to. She was quiet for a long moment. Take the mule, she said. She is slow, but she does not quit. Sounds like her owner. The corner of her mouth moved. Get out of here before I change my mind. He left before first light. She heard him in the dark moving quietly through the process of saddling the leather and the buckles and the mule's patient breathing. She did not get up. She lay on the cot and listened to him leave, and there was a particular quality to that sound, the sound of someone going that she had not let herself hear in a long time, because she had stopped expecting anyone to arrive in the first place. Then she got up. She stood on the porch in the gray of early morning and watched him until the road bent south and the brush swallowed him, and there was nothing left to watch but the empty track and the mud settling back down into the stillness. She stood there for 10 minutes, 9 minutes longer than she would have admitted to anyone. Then she went inside, loaded the rifle she kept under the floorboards, and leaned it against the wall beside the door. She was not helpless. She had never been helpless. But the shack felt different with him gone larger, somehow the way a room does not know its own size until it loses something that was filling it. The coffee she made that morning tasted different. Not worse, just lonelier. She went out to the bean patch and worked until her shoulders ached and she did not think about the road. She thought about the road anyway. Kit came on Saturday, not the careful kind of coming he had practiced, not the way of moving through space that a boy learns when making noise has consequences. He came running, full speed down the track from the direction of Town Arms, pumping, and when he came around the side of the shack and saw Nora at the well, he stopped and bent double with his hands on his knees. She was beside him before he could straighten. Kit, what happened? He gulped air. He came back early. He was supposed to be at the hotel for dinner. He always is, 40 minutes, never less. And I was on the last pages, the ones at the back of the ledger, the ones from 75, and he was there, in the doorway. She put both hands on his shoulders. Slow down. Did he see what you had? I do not know. I do not think so. I ran. He held up a fistful of paper crumpled and dark at the edges where his grip had soaked them. I grabbed what I had and I ran. She took the papers, smoothed them against her thigh. Kit's handwriting that covered both sides of each sheet, small and careful. The letters she had taught him out of her mother's old primer. Numbers, names, dates, the double columns that told the true story of what Dade had been doing to this county for more than a decade. This is enough, she said. It is not. There is more. The worst of it is in the back of the ledger. The farms he took in 75, the families he ran off. I did not get there. Kit, she looked at him. This is enough. He shook his head. His eyes were wide and his lip was cut fresh, the kind of cut a face gets when it connects with something that had no intention of moving. She noticed it now, the careful way he was holding his jaw, the slight swelling already beginning along the left side. Who hit you? Nobody. She waited. Crow, he said finally, saw me near Doc Hensley's last week and grabbed my collar and asked where I was going. He did not believe me when I said I was heading back to the stable. She studied his face, looked at the cut, looked at the boy beneath the cut, the one who had been surviving on whatever scraps a dangerous man decided to throw his way, since before he was old enough to understand what dangerous truly meant. Come inside, she said. Inside, she cleaned his lip with the same whiskey and the same steady hand she had used on Colt 5 days ago. Kit sat on the stool with his hands gripping the edges and his jaw set against the sting of it. "You did not have to do this," she said quietly. "Copying those records, taking that risk." He looked at the floor. "You fed me," he said, "when nobody else would. When Dade cut my rations that January and I went 3 days without anything, you walked 2 miles in the cold and left cornbread outside the door." He swallowed. "Nobody ever did something like that for me before. Not without wanting something back. That was just food, Kit." He looked up at her, and his eyes were very old for 13. "No, ma'am," he said. "That was the first time anybody treated me like I mattered." She stopped moving, just for a moment. Just one. Then she wrung the rag out and went back to work. That evening, she sat alone at the table with the oil lamp burning low and spread Kit's papers out in front of her. She organized them by name, by family, the way she had imagined doing this for 2 years. The real debt in one column, Dade's reported number in another. The difference. The theft, written out in a boy's careful hand that had learned its letters from books left on a fence post in the cold. The numbers were worse than she had expected. Boone and Vera Lund, $410 owed. Dade's ledger said 800. The Morrow family, 320. Dade's number was 700. Old Amos Jenner, who had sold his plow horse in October and his winter grain stores in November, trying to stay current on a debt that kept somehow growing. Despite his payments, his real debt was $90. Dade had it written as 280. She worked through all 15 pages. When she was done, she sat back and looked at the ceiling for a long time. Then she turned to the last page. Kit had managed to grab the one she had set aside because the handwriting was different. Not Kit's careful copying. This was Dade's own hand, smaller and denser, the ink gone slightly brown at the edges from age. A different ledger entirely. She had not looked at it closely yet, had taken it to be more financial records. It was not financial records. It was a journal. Narrow lines, dense ink, dated entries going back years. She almost set it aside. Then a date caught her eye and held it the way certain dates hold you when they belong to the worst night of your life. June 14th, 1877. She pulled the lamp closer. Callaway lands still not settled. Old man refused again this morning, third time. Told him the offer would not improve. He told me to get off his property. Crow handled the barn. Callaway won't be signing anything now. She read it again. Then she read it a third time because the first 2 times her mind had tried to smooth the edges of it, tried to make it mean something other than what it plainly said. Crow handled the barn. Crow, Sid Crow, Dade's man, the same man who had held a knife to Kit Malloy's throat in the middle of a road to keep a woman from telling the truth. Not a drunk with a lantern. Not a daughter who hesitated for 1 second in the dark. Not an accident or a tragedy or the kind of thing that just happens to families that are already fraying at the edges. Sid Crow had set that fire on Dade's order because her father would not sell. Her father had died in that barn because he had told Warren Dade to get off his land, because he had refused a third time and there was not going to be a fourth. And Nora had spent 6 years carrying the weight of 1 second she stood still, 1 second she had been turning over in the dark for so long, it had become as familiar as her own breathing. She had built her guilt around that 1 second, the way you build a house around a cracked foundation, not knowing the crack was the lie, and the house was the real damage. Not one word of it was her fault. Not 1 second. Not the lantern. Not the fire. Not the barn. Not her father lying inside it. Dade had ordered it, Crow had done it, and then Dade had spent 6 years pointing at the nearest available target and making sure everyone in Dustfield had a reason to look where he pointed. She sat at that table until the lamp burned down to nothing, and the room went dark around her, and she did not cry, and she did not speak, and somewhere in the hours between midnight and dawn, something settled in her chest that had not been settled in a very long time. Not peace exactly. Something harder than peace. Something with edges that did not apologize for themselves. The kind of knowing that makes a person very calm and very deliberate. Crow came in the afternoon. He did not come alone. 2 men flanked him that Nora did not recognize, the hired kind, the kind that come with guns and no history in a place and leave the same way when the money runs out. He pulled his horse up 20 yards from the shack and sat there the way men do when they want you to understand they have all the time they need and you do not. Nora was on the porch. She had been on the porch for an hour watching the road. She had known they would come before sunset. Miss Callaway, Crow said. His voice was the voice of a man delivering a message he already knows the answer to. Mr. Dade sends his regards. The boy took property from his office. We have come to collect it, and the boy both. She held the rifle across her lap. She had not raised it. She did not need to raise it yet. There is no stolen property here, she said, and Kit Malloy is not going anywhere. Crow shifted in his saddle. Last chance to do this the easy way. She looked at him. She thought about 6 years of rocks through her window, 6 years of a locked doctor's door and an empty store counter, and her name spoken in this town like a warning parents gave their children. 6 years of silence that she had chosen because a man had held a knife to a child's throat and she had not been willing to pay that price. She thought about what was written in Dade's own hand. Crow handled the barn. Whatever you came here to say, she said, say it and go. Hand over the papers and the boy. There are no papers here, she said. The man who was staying on my land left 2 days ago for Hayes City with everything Kit copied. Copies and the journal both. He has a 3-day head start. She looked at Crow steadily. So whatever you do here tonight, it does not change what is already riding toward a federal judge. Crow's eyes moved across the porch. Across the window, the closed door, the rifle in her lap. He was calculating something. She could see him doing it, the arithmetic of risk running behind his eyes. You are bluffing, he said. She met his eyes and did not look away. You willing to bet Dade's freedom on it? The two hired men looked at each other. Something passed between them that did not have words. Crow's jaw worked. He looked at her for a long moment with something close to respect in his face that he was trying to keep out of it. Then he turned his horse. You have until morning, he said. After that, Dade stops asking. He rode back toward the road. The two men followed. Nora sat on the porch and watched them go and kept her hands still on the rifle until they were out of sight. Then she let out the breath she had been holding for about 3 minutes. She had told Colt she had been alone for 6 years and knew how to manage it. That was true. She knew how to fix a fence post and haul water by hand and stitch a burlap sack over a broken window. She knew how to hear a horse on the road at night and be at the door with the rifle before it reached the yard. She had built a life out of knowing how to manage alone. But Colt did not have those papers. He had left before Kit ran, before the journal, before any of it. He was somewhere between Dustfield and Hayes City on a slow mule with no idea what had happened in the 2 days since he rode out. And if Crow thought hard enough about the timeline, the bluff would collapse like a wall with no foundation. She went back inside. Kit was at the table. His face was the face of a boy who had heard every word and understood most of them. We need to go, she said. Go where she folded the papers in the journal, put them in the tin box with the latch, and pushed the box to the bottom of the flour sack. She tied the neck of the sack twice, then once more. Vera and Boone Lunge, she said. Their place is 4 miles east off the Comstock Road. Vera once brought me bread when no one was watching. She said nothing, just left it on the fence post and walked away. She paused. That is the kind of thing that tells you who a person is. Kit looked at the door, then at her. What if Crow comes back before morning? Then we will not be here. She took the rifle and the flour sack. She did not look back at the shack when they left through the bean patch and into the dry brush toward the creek. She wanted to. She wanted to stand on that porch one more time and look down the road and imagine it containing a man on a slow mule coming back the way he said he would. But she did not have that kind of time. Vera Lund opened the door with a shotgun and a candle. When she saw who it was, she lowered the gun by about 4 inches, which in the circumstances Nora considered a warm welcome. Lord have mercy. Get inside, both of you. Now. She pulled them through and bolted the door and pressed her back against it as if the wood needed help, holding against whatever was behind them. Nora, what are you doing here? If Boone sees that you— I know what I am asking, Nora said. One night, Vera. That is all. We will be gone before first light. Vera looked at Kit. The boy was pale and holding himself very still, the way children do when they are trying to take up no space at all, as if making themselves small enough might make them invisible to whatever bad thing is looking. That boy needs food, Vera said, and that was the whole of the decision. The thing about people who are fundamentally good is that they make their choices fast without having to work through them, and the choice is always the same. She sat Kit at the kitchen table and put cold cornbread and a plate of beans in front of him, and he ate with the focused silence of someone who has learned not to take food for granted. Vera watched him for a moment, then looked at Nora. Talk fast, she said. Boone will be in from the barn inside the hour. Nora told her everything, the ledger copies, the journal, what was written in Dade's own hand on June 14th, 1877. She laid it out plain and straight, the way you lay out evidence, not the way you tell a story. Vera listened without speaking. Her hands were folded on the table in front of her, perfectly still. When Nora finished, Vera unfolded her hands and placed them flat on the table. Those numbers Kit copied, she said. They show what we actually owe. The real numbers. Yes. Vera's eyes went bright in the way that has nothing to do with happiness and everything to do with the sudden arrival of truth after a long time without it. Boone has been working 3 harvests trying to pay down a debt that Dade keeps telling us is growing no matter how much we pay. We sold the milk cow in November. She paused. I sold my mother's ring in February. Nora looked at her. He told us we owed $800, Vera said quietly. 800. You owe 410, Nora said. The page with your name is in the tin box. Vera's hand went over her mouth. My mother's ring, she said. She did not say anything else for a moment. The words sat there between them, doing all the work that needed doing. Then she straightened. Her eyes went hard in the way of a woman who has finally located the exact thing she is angry at after years of the anger having no specific address. What do you need, she said. I need to be in the town square tomorrow morning, Nora said. In front of people. As many as I can get. Vera nodded slowly. Tomorrow is Sunday. Nora looked at her. Everyone will be at church, Vera said. Every family in Dustfield. They come out after the service, and they stand on the steps, and they shake hands, and they do not go home for at least half an hour. She paused. Dade sits in the front pew every Sunday. Has for 20 years. Right up front like he bought the seat. I know, Nora said. Vera stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the dark yard, turned back. If you stand on those church steps tomorrow and read those numbers, she said, you will not be alone, because I will be standing right beside you. And if I am standing there, Alice Morrow will stand. And if Alice stands, her husband will stand. In Boone, the back door opened. Boone Lund came in from the barn, saw Nora at his kitchen table and stopped. He was a big man, rough hands, a weathered face, the kind of body built by decades of work that did not ask whether he felt like doing it that morning. His expression closed down when he saw her, not cruel but careful. The careful of a man who has a family and knows what it costs to find yourself on the wrong side of Warren Dade. What is this, he said. Vera said, sit down, Boone. Something in her voice made him sit. Vera put a single page in front of him. Kit's handwriting. 2 columns, one with the real number, one with Dade's number. That is our debt, she said. The real one. Boone looked at the page. Read it, Vera said. He read it. Now this one. He read that too. His hands went flat on the table. His fingers spread wide all the way out, the slow, deliberate stillness of a man holding himself very carefully in place because he does not trust what he might do if he lets go. The milk cow, he said. His voice was very low. The milk cow we sold. My father's watch. He looked up at Nora. How do you know this is real? Kit said from the other end of the table. Because I copied it from Dade's own ledger. His voice was small, but it held. I have been in his office 3 years. I have seen both books. The one he shows people and the one he keeps locked in the left drawer. The numbers have never matched. Not once. Not for any family. Boone looked at the boy, at the cut on his lip, at the careful way Kit was holding himself on the stool, the way of someone who has learned to take up very little room. He looked at Nora. He lied to us, Boone said. All of us, to every family in this county, Nora said. For years. The kitchen was quiet enough to hear the lamp burning and the night insects outside and the distant sound of Callaway Creek moving in the dark. Then Boone Lund put his head in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were wet, and he did not try to hide it. He was not that kind of man, the kind who hides what is honest. I stood there, he said, in the square, when they tied you to that wagon. I stood there and I did not move. Don't, Nora said. He shook his head. I came to your property and told you to sell your land. I stood in your yard and I said it because of my children, because I was afraid of losing the farm. He pressed his mouth together. And the whole time he was robbing us. He was robbing us and using our fear to break you. He was quiet for a moment, working through something that needed to be worked through. Then he said, I will be there tomorrow, whatever you need. Nora nodded. She lay awake that night on a pallet in the Lund's back room, while Kit slept on the floor beside her with the absolute depth of a child who has finally landed somewhere safe enough to fully let go. She lay on her back and looked at the dark ceiling and thought about what she was going to do in the morning. She thought about Dade's journal, about June 14th, 1877. She thought about 6 years of carrying something that was never hers to carry. 6 years of waking up in the dark and running the same calculation, asking the same question about 1 second, in a burning barn getting the same answer that was never actually an answer. She thought about Colt's voice quiet and certain the night he had told her he did not believe it. He knew it. Outside, a night bird called once and went silent. Somewhere down the road, Crow was reporting back to Dade that the bluff might not have been a bluff, that the evidence might already be gone, that the window for stopping this quietly was closing faster than Dade had planned for. In the morning, she was going to stand on the church steps in Dustfield, Texas, with a tin box under her arm and the truth on 15 pages of a boy's careful handwriting, and she was going to read every number out loud in front of every person who had thrown a rock through her window, or refused to sell her flour, or stood in a square and watched her get tied to a wagon axle and not moved. She was going to do it without a judge, without legal backing, without Colt. He was 3 days away and did not know what was happening. But she thought about what he had said sitting on the porch with the stars out watching the road for her. You don't watch a road for the good things. You watch it for the bad things so you're ready when they show up. She turned on the pallet. She thought about what it had felt like to have someone watching the road for her. Sir, come back, she said. Not to the ceiling, not to anyone in particular, just to the dark and the night sounds and whatever was listening in the space between one breath and the next. You said you would. So come back. She closed her eyes. Sunday morning came, gray and still, the kind of morning that holds its breath before the heat moves in. Nora washed her face in the basin in the Loon kitchen and drank her coffee, standing up, and watched the window lighten by degrees as the sky decided what kind of day it was going to be. Vera was already dressed. Boone had been up since before Nora, out doing his morning chores, with an efficiency that told her he had not slept much either. Kit ate his breakfast fast and quiet, and when he was done, he looked at Nora across the table. Are you scared? He asked. She thought about it honestly. Yes, she said. He thought about that for a moment. Then he said, Miss Calloway, what you told me. That day at the stable last winter, when you said copying the records was too dangerous. You were protecting me. She did not answer. You have been protecting me since before I knew you were doing it, he said. He looked at his hands on the table. 2 years ago at the town meeting. You sat down because of me. He looked up. I found out. Crow told me when he grabbed my collar last week. He wanted me to know. He said you sat down because of me, and he laughed about it. Kit, I want to stand with you today, he said. On those steps, whatever happens. She looked at this boy, with his old eyes and the cut still healing on his lip, and 6 years of surviving, something that should have broken him long before now. You already did the hard part, she said. You did it alone in the dark for months when nobody asked you to, and nobody knew you were doing it. Today is just saying out loud what you already wrote down. He nodded slowly. Then he straightened in his chair in the way of someone who has made up their mind about something and their body is catching up to the decision. They left through the back of the Lund property as the church bell was starting its first call across town. Vera and Boone followed. By the time they reached the edge of town, Alice Morrow and her husband had joined them from the Comstock Road, walking fast with their heads down and their eyes forward. Old Amos Jenner came from the south track on his cane jaw set like a man who had decided something he was not going to undecide. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. 7 people walked toward the church. Nora walked in front, tin box under her arm, flour sack over her shoulder, bare feet on the morning dust of the main road. She did not look left, and she did not look right. She looked straight at the church at the end of the street. The congregation was coming out as they arrived. The slow Sunday ritual of handshakes and good mornings and children scattering down the steps into the light, the ordinary beautiful noise of a community that had no idea what was about to change. Dade came out last. He always came out last. The way a man comes out last when he has decided the whole room is his anteroom and everyone else is just waiting for him. He saw her. And for just a moment, one moment gone as fast as it came, something moved behind his eyes. That was not the smooth, practiced calm he wore like his linen suit. A flicker, like a candle in a draft. Then it was gone. "Miss Calloway," he said. His voice was pleasant and even. "This is a surprise." Nora stopped at the base of the steps. She looked up at him. She looked at the 50-odd people standing in the churchyard with their coffee cups and their Sunday clothes and their faces already turning toward the thing that was about to happen. Because people always know when something is about to happen, even before it does. She lifted the tin box in both hands. And Dade, who had been 3 steps ahead of her for 6 years, turned to the crowd and raised his voice. "That woman tampered with my records," he said. "She has been lying to this town, for I have a witness," Dade said louder now, and a man stepped forward from the side of the church that Nora had not seen standing there. He was middle-aged, nondescript, the kind of face that does not ask to be remembered. He had been in Dustfield for 3 months, staying in Dade's grain warehouse, doing nothing anyone could clearly identify. Nora had seen him twice on the main street and thought nothing of it, which was exactly what he was designed to produce. His name, Nora would later learn, was Royce Pell. "I saw her," Pell said to the crowd in the flat, practiced tone of someone who has rehearsed a thing so many times the rehearsal is no longer visible. "The night of the Calloway fire. I saw her with the lantern in the barn." The crowd shifted. The sound that comes from 50 people recalculating at the same time, all that quiet arithmetic happening in 50 different heads. Nora stood at the base of those steps with the tin box in her hands, and she looked at Royce Pell, and she understood exactly what she was seeing. A man kept in reserve for exactly this moment. Dade had been preparing for the day someone finally stood up, and he had prepared thoroughly the way careful men prepare for contingencies they hope will never arrive. She looked at the crowd. She opened the tin box, and she started reading. She read the first name. Boone and Vera Lund. Real debt $410. Warren Dade's reported number $800. Difference $390. Vera's voice came from behind her, clear and carrying across the churchyard. "We sold our milk cow. I sold my mother's wedding ring to pay a debt that did not exist." Nora read the second name. Alice and Henry Morrow. Real debt $320. Dade's number $700. Difference $380. Alice Morrow pressed her hand over her mouth. Her husband put his arm around her shoulders without looking away from Nora. She read the third. Amos Jenner. Real debt $90. Dade's number 280. The old man on his cane said nothing. He did not need to. Every person in that churchyard had watched him sell his plow horse and his winter stores and keep working through a season that would have broken a younger man trying to pay down a number that Dade had simply invented out of ink and authority. Dade's voice cut through the reading. "That woman tampered with my records. She is standing in front of you with stolen property and invented numbers, and she expects you to believe her over me." He turned to the crowd with the ease of a man who has never once doubted that the room belongs to him. "You know what she is. You have always known what she is." Some faces wavered. 6 years of believing a thing leaves deep marks, the kind that do not go away just because a woman you have been taught to distrust shows up with papers. Then Kip Malloy walked to the bottom of the steps and stood beside Nora. He was 13 years old and his lip was still healing, and his boots were worn down to almost nothing. He did not look like much. He stood there anyway. "My name is Kit Malloy," he said. "I have worked in Mr. Dade's office for 3 years. I cleaned his floors and ran his errands, and he gave me the key to the front door because he needed someone there before he arrived in the morning." He looked at the crowd, found their eyes, and held them. "He gave me that key because he did not think it mattered. He did not think I could read." A sound moved through the crowd. Not laughter, not quite. Something between recognition and something else. "I copied those numbers," Kit said, "from his own ledger. The real one, the one he keeps locked in the left drawer of his desk. I have seen him open it every week for 3 years. The numbers in that drawer do not match the numbers he shows your families. They have never matched." And when he found out the records did not add up, he looked for someone to blame. He looked at Nora. He blamed her because she was already someone this town had decided not to believe. He looked back at the crowd. "She fed me when Mr. Dade cut my rations and I went 3 days without eating. She left books outside my door when nobody thought it mattered whether I could read or not. And when she stood up 2 years ago at the town meeting to tell you the truth, he put a knife to my throat to make her sit down. The churchyard went very still. Kit's voice cracked once. He found it again. I am 13 years old and I could not stand to watch anymore. He paused, let that land where it needed to land. You are not 13. You have been watching for 6 years. Dade turned to the man he had positioned at the side of the church for exactly this moment. Royce Pell stepped forward again. His voice was flat and practiced, and he looked at some point between the crowd and Nora when he delivered his lines. I was passing through in June of '77. I saw her at the Calloway property the night of the fire. I saw her with the lantern in the barn. The crowd shifted again. 50 people doing the arithmetic of what they wanted to believe against what they were hearing, 50 different calculations running all at once. Nora held the tin box and said nothing, because she knew and Dade knew, and Royce Pell certainly knew, that a prepared witness delivered with confidence is worth more than the truth in a churchyard on a Sunday morning. And Dade had been preparing for this day a great deal longer than she had. Then a voice came from the back of the crowd. Quiet, not loud. The kind of voice that does not need volume because it has already decided it will be heard the way certain voices carry, not because of force, but because of what is behind them. I know that man. The crowd parted. Colt Raines walked through the middle of it in his blue work shirt and brown leather vest, dusty from 5 hard days on the road, moving with the unhurried steadiness of someone who has stopped being in a hurry about anything that matters. He looked like exactly what he was. A man who had been somewhere hard and come back because he said he would. He stopped at the base of the steps. He looked at Royce Pell. Fort Dodge, Kansas, he said. 1880, court-martial proceeding for Sergeant Aldous Webb. You testified that Webb was off post the night of the incident. Webb was convicted. 18 months later, the man who actually paid you for that testimony was found out and Webb was released with full apology from the court. Pell's mouth opened. Fort Dodge again, Colt said. 1881. Land dispute, Comanche County. You testified for the plaintiff. Plaintiff won. Plaintiff later fled the state ahead of a fraud warrant. He reached into the breast pocket of his vest and placed a card on the step between them. His military identification worn at the edges, the ink faded but legible. The kind of document a man keeps because it is the last proof of who he was during the years that shaped him. My name is Colt Raines, he said. I served 4 years with the 6th Cavalry out of Fort Wallace. I know this man's face and I know his history and I know what he does for money. He looked at Pell steadily without anger, just the clean, cold certainty of someone telling the truth in front of people who need to hear it. Say it again. Look at me and say what you just said to this crowd. Royce Pell looked at the card on the step. He looked at Colt. He looked at the crowd, which was looking back at him with the particular attention of people who have just been given a very specific reason to look more carefully at a man. He did not say it again. The silence that came out of that refusal was worth more than any confession. It had weight and shape and texture, and every person standing in that churchyard could feel it pressing down on the morning-like weather moving in. Dade's composure cracked. Not all at once. A fracture line visible now running from the corner of his jaw to somewhere behind his eyes where the smooth, practiced man ended and whatever was underneath him began. You have no proof of any of this, he said. No documentation, no court record, just the word of a drifter who has been living on my enemy's property for 2 weeks. Judge Harlan Cross said I would like to see the ledger. He had arrived Wednesday morning, 2 hours ahead of anyone expecting him. 60 years old, a face cut from the same stone they use for federal buildings, riding in a buckboard with a clerk and 3 leather satchels of law books. He had been sitting in the second row of the churchyard since the reading of the first name, and no one had noticed him, which was exactly how he preferred to work. A judge who announces himself before he has heard the testimony has already decided something, and Cross had made a career of deciding nothing before the evidence was complete. He stood now. Nora had heard of Judge Harlan Cross, good reputation, the kind of reputation that travels because it has been tested in hard cases and come out on the right side of them. He looked like his reputation. Mr. Dade, he said, I am Judge Harlan Cross, Circuit Court out of Hays City. I was asked here by a Mr. Colt Raines on behalf of a formal complaint against you. He looked at the ledger in Dade's hand and at the tin box in Nora's hands. I would like to see both books. The one you are holding and the one these numbers were copied from. Dade looked at the judge, then at the crowd, again among. Then at Sid Crow's usual position at the edge of the churchyard, which was empty this morning, had been empty since before the service, because Crow had apparently made his own private calculation about which side of this particular wall to be standing on when it fell, and had chosen absence. He looked at his lawyer, Weston from Wichita, sharp, inexpensive, a man who charged accordingly for knowing which rooms to walk out of before they collapsed. Weston had taken 2 careful steps backward without appearing to move at all. "This is not a formal proceeding," Dade said. "This is a public square. You have no authority to compel." "I have complete authority," Cross said pleasantly. "And we can do this here, or we can do it in a proper courtroom on Monday morning, at which point I will issue a formal order, and your refusal to cooperate today will become part of the official record." He tilted his head slightly. "Which would you prefer?" The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. Then Sheriff Cass Pruitt walked out of the church. He had been standing inside the open doorway since Colt arrived. Nobody had seen him there. He had come in through the side entrance while the crowd was watching the steps, and he had listened to all of it, and now he walked out and stood at the top of the church steps with a thick envelope in his hands, and the look of a man who has spent a very long time deciding something and has finally irrevocably decided it. He was still wearing his badge. "Warren," he said. "Just that. The man's first name. Not Mr., not Sir. The way you say a name when you are done with every other form of address, and all that remains is the person themselves." Dade looked at his brother-in-law. Pruitt walked down the steps and placed the envelope on the step beside Colt's military card. "3 years," Pruitt said. He spoke slowly and clearly, the way a man speaks when he knows he is saying something he cannot take back and has made his peace with that. "Every time I watched you do something I knew was wrong, I wrote it down. Every family you squeezed, every debt you doubled, every time you used my badge to make people too afraid to ask questions." He stopped. "The officials you paid in Comstock, the deed transfers you forced through in 75, the families you drove off their land." He looked at Dade. "All of it, in there." Dade's face had gone the color of old ash. "You are my family," Dade said. His voice had changed completely now. The smooth, practiced tone was entirely gone. What was underneath it was smaller and harder, and not nearly as impressive as the performance had been. "You are married to my sister. You cannot—" "You were my family," Pruitt said. He looked at Nora. "Miss Calloway." He paused, and something moved across his face that had been a long time building and a long time coming. "I have owed you something for 6 years. I'm sorry it took me this long to figure out how to pay it." He looked at Judge Cross. "I am ready to testify," he said, "to all of it." Cross took the envelope, opened it, looked at the first page, then the second. He looked at Kit's copied numbers spread carefully in the tin box. Then he looked at the journal entry in Dade's own hand, June 14th, 1877, which Nora had placed at the very top of the box before she left the Lund house that morning, because it was the most important piece and she wanted it seen first. He read the journal entry twice. He looked up at Dade. Crow handled the barn. He said, reading it aloud in the quiet of the churchyard so that every person present could hear exactly what Warren Dade had written in his own hand on the night a man died in a fire his daughter had been blamed for ever since. He closed the envelope. "Mr. Dade, I am going to need you to come with me." Dade looked around the churchyard one more time. He looked for Crow, who was gone. He looked for Weston, who was now studying the fence post near the church gate with extraordinary concentration. He looked at the faces of the people he had owned for years, the families he had squeezed and frightened and used as instruments to break a woman who would not sell him her land. And what he found in those faces was not fear. It was the particular expression of people who have just been released from something they did not have a name for while they were inside it, the dead, uncertain look of people walking out of a dark building into daylight, still blinking, still finding their footing. There was nothing in any of those faces that was going to help him. He walked through the crowd toward his office with Judge Cross's clerk at his elbow and Sheriff Pruitt 3 steps behind him, and the people moved aside for him, not because they were afraid, but because they wanted him gone, and the space he left behind him felt lighter the moment he passed through it. Like a pressure that had been building for years had finally quietly released. Nora stood at the bottom of the church steps. The crowd was still there. Nobody had left. 50 people in their Sunday clothes standing in the morning heat, and not one of them moving toward the gate as if they were all waiting for something they did not have a word for yet. Then Vera Lund walked down the steps and put her arms around Nora and held on. "You did it," Vera said quiet, just for the two of them. "My God, Nora, you did it." Nora's hands came up. She gripped the back of Vera's dress and held on it, and for a moment she did not trust herself to speak. Then the shaking started. Not fear, not weakness. The kind of shaking that comes when a body finally releases something it has been carrying so long, it had started to believe the carrying was just how it felt to be alive. The kind that comes from putting down a weight you have been holding so long, you forgot you were holding it. Kit was beside her before she knew he had moved. He did not say anything. He put his hand on her arm and stood there with the steadiness of a boy who has learned that sometimes the only thing you can do for someone is simply not leave. Alice Morrow came next. Then Boone Lund, who looked like a man who had put down something very heavy and was still adjusting to the unfamiliar lightness of it. Then women Nora had not spoken to in years, faces she had last seen turning away from her, in the street hands reaching for her arms and her shoulders. "I am sorry," said one. "We should have known," said another. "We should have asked questions. We should have stood up. Forgive us." Nora stood in the middle of it and felt something she did not have a name for. Not joy, not relief. Something bigger and more complicated and more frightening than either one of those things, the feeling of a woman who has been down so long she forgot that up was a direction available to her. Old Amos Jenner worked his way through the crowd on his cane and stood in front of her and looked at her with 80 years of everything in his eyes, the particular look of someone who has seen enough of the world to know exactly what he is looking at. "Your father was a good man," he said. "He had his troubles, but he was a good man, and you are his daughter, and that is not a small thing." Nora's chin buckled. She did not catch it this time. She covered her face with both hands and her shoulders shook, and she made the sound of 6 years coming up all at once, which is not a quiet sound and is not a composed sound, but is the only honest sound for what it was. The sound of a woman who had been right the whole time and had been made to feel wrong for so long, she had started to lose track of the difference. Nobody looked away. Cross spent 2 hours in Dade's office with both Ledgers and his clerk and Pruitt at the door. He came out at noon and stood on the steps of the grain warehouse with his jacket straight and his voice carrying the full weight of what it had been given. "The numbers do not match," he said. "The discrepancies are not bookkeeping errors. They are systematic, deliberate, and they span 11 years of records." He looked at the crowd that had followed and gathered. "Warren Dade is being held pending formal charges of fraud, embezzlement, and criminal conspiracy. Every debt currently held by Mr. Dade will be fully audited and recalculated. Any family found to have been overcharged will receive full restitution." He paused. He looked at Nora. "Miss Nora Calloway," he said, "I have reviewed the records of this county carefully. There are no charges against you, no trial record, no conviction of any kind. There is a pattern of deliberate public defamation carried out over 6 years by a man who needed someone to point at so that no one would think to look at his own books. That pattern ends today." The crowd was quiet. A door closed somewhere on the other end of town. Wind moved through the gap between the warehouse and the feed store, carrying a little bit of dust and a little bit of something that felt almost like the beginning of a different kind of morning. A child somewhere started crying and was shushed. Then from somewhere in the middle of the crowd, someone started to clap. It was Boone Lund, his big rough hands coming together in the July heat. Not wild, not the kind of sound you hear from a distance, just a man clapping because it was the right thing to do, and he had not done enough right things lately. It spread. One pair of hands, then 3, then 10, then the whole of the crowd steady and quiet, the sound of people who are mostly just relieved that the thing that needed to happen has finally happened. Pruitt removed his badge that afternoon. He did it without ceremony, set it on Cross's makeshift desk in the church with a quietness that said everything that needed saying, and walked out into the July heat and kept walking. The town would elect Sam Morrow's cousin 3 weeks later, a man who had spent 10 years as a deputy marshal in Missouri and who on his very first day as sheriff of Dustfield, Texas, took down the wagon axle from the post in the town square and burned it in the vacant lot behind the livery stable. Nobody complained. Several people stood and watched it burn, and went home feeling fractionally lighter than they had in years. Dade left for the county seat in Irons on Thursday morning. The trial lasted 4 days. He was convicted on 11 counts. The sentence was 14 years. His assets were seized, his warehouse transferred to county administration, and the long, slow process of restitution began, which was imperfect the way all real reckoning is, but it began and it did not stop. Vera Lund received at the conclusion of the audit the cash equivalent of one wedding ring her mother sold in February of that year to pay a debt that had not existed. She had a small gold ring made by the jeweler in Comstock, wore it on a chain around her neck, and never took it off for the rest of her life. Nora sat on the church steps for a long time after the crowd had finally gradually gone home. She sat with her feet on the warm stone and the tin box in her lap, and the afternoon light going golden over the rooftops of Dustfield. Kit was somewhere behind her talking to the Morrow boys, the sound of his laughter carrying across the empty square in a way she had not heard from him before. Laughter without caution in it, the kind that does not look over its shoulder. It was a good sound. It was the kind of sound that tells you something has fundamentally changed. She heard the horses before she saw them. Two riders coming in from the North Road, moving at the pace of people who have been riding hard for days and have given up the pretense of arriving easily. One horse was familiar, gray and steady, the kind of horse a careful man chooses. The other's was her mule. She stood up. Colt had been on the road for 5 days. He looked every one of them. His shirt was dark with road dust, and his eyes carried the particular quality of a man who has been watching too many horizons for too long without finding the one he was looking for. He sat the mule the way he always sat it, straight-backed and easy like a man with nowhere pressing to be, but she could see the set of his jaw from 50 yards out, and she knew he had not been easy about it. He pulled up at the edge of the square. She walked toward him. He dismounted before she reached him, and they stood 10 feet apart in the middle of the square, where 5 days ago she had been tied to a wagon axle with her wrists bleeding and 50 people watching, and neither of them moved for a moment. "You were supposed to be gone a week," she said. "Pruitt found me on the road outside Hayes City," he said. "Told me what happened." She looked at him. "What you did," he said. "The church steps. The numbers. Standing up there alone before I got back." "I was not alone." "Nora," she shook her head. "It needed to be done. You were 3 days away, and the window was closing." He took a step forward. "You did not wait for me. I could not wait. You know that." Another step. "I know that." He stopped close enough that she could see the road dust on his vest, the worn edges of the leather, the small details of a man who had been moving hard towards something specific. "I know why you could not wait. I am not saying you should have." She looked up at him. "What are you saying?" He was quiet for a moment, working out how to say the thing that had been sitting in him for 5 days on a slow mule with nothing to do but think. "I left this place because I thought getting a judge was the thing that would end this," he said. "And I was riding as hard as that mule would go every day, and I kept thinking about what I had left behind." He paused. "Somewhere around the second day I stopped thinking about the judge at all." She did not say anything. "I've been riding west for 2 years," he said, "running from a grave in Nebraska." He met her eyes, and she saw the thing that had been there since the first morning she had helped him sit up on the cot and handed him coffee. He met her eyes fully and did not qualify what he was about to say. "First time in 2 years somewhere on the road between here and Hayes City, I realized I was not riding away from something." He stopped. "I was riding towards something. Nora." The sound of her name in that particular way. She said, "Don't tell me things you can't back up." He looked at her steadily. "I rode 5 days on your mule." Her mouth moved. Something in her chest moved, the same thing that had been moving since the first morning she heard him hammering fence posts, and did not know what to do with the sound of it. "That backs it up," she said. He did not close the remaining distance between them. She did. She put her hand flat against his chest, over the blue work shirt, over the brown leather vest, right over his heart, and she felt it beating there, steady and present and going nowhere. "You came back," she said. "I told you I would. People say things, I know they do." She looked at him. At the scar above his ear, she had cleaned and packed and pressed cold rags against through a night when he did not know his own name. At the hands that had fixed her fence and her well rope and sat on her porch in the dark, watching her road without being asked and without expecting anything in return. I slept on the porch while you were gone, she said. Your side of it. Because it still smelled like you, and that made me feel safer than the rifle did, and I have never told anyone something that embarrassing in my entire life. He said nothing. I have been alone for 6 years, she said. I was managing. I knew how to manage. And then you showed up half dead in a riverbed, and I dragged you home, and now I cannot remember what managing felt like before you were in it. She kept her hand on his chest. I am not good at this. I have never been good at this. But I am done running from it, and I am done being afraid of wanting something real. She held his eyes. Stay, she said. Not quite asking, not quite demanding. The word had 6 years of everything behind it, and she let it carry every bit of that weight. He put his hand over hers. I am staying, he said, right here, not going anywhere. She leaned into him. Not dramatically, not the way stories do it when they want you to know it is a romantic moment. The way a person leans when they are tired of holding themselves up alone and they have finally found something they trust enough to lean on. He put his arm around her and held her, and they stood in the middle of the square in Dustfield, Texas in the afternoon light, and neither of them said anything else for a while because they had already said everything that mattered. Kit found them there. He came across the square at a run, stopped when he saw them, and stood at a respectful distance with the instincts of a boy who has spent his whole life reading rooms and knowing when to wait. Colt looked at him over Nora's head. You all right? Kit nodded. He looked at Nora. Miss Calloway. He paused in the way of someone gathering himself for a question that matters more than it might appear to. What happens now? She pulled back, wiped her face with the back of her hand, looked at this boy who had copied 30 pages of evidence in secret and stood on church steps in front of everyone who had ever frightened him and told the truth in a clear voice. She said, come home. He looked at her. With us, she said. The shack is not much, but the well works now and the fence is straight and there is room. Kit looked at the ground. He looked at his boots, the ones worn down to almost nothing, the ones she knew the whole history of. He looked up. Is it my home, he said, or am I just staying there? It is yours, she said. If you want it, he did not answer in words. He reached down and worked his boots off his feet, the worn-down soles that had carried him through 3 years of surviving something he should not have had to survive at 13. He walked to the edge of the square and set them down beside the water trough and stood there barefoot on the warm packed dirt of Dustfield with the afternoon light on his face. Then he looked back at them and said, Okay, Colt's chest moved once. Let's go, he said. The three of them walked back to the shack that evening, down the south road out of town, the light going amber and long and flat across the Texas land, the heat finally beginning to ease at the edges the way it does in late afternoon, when the day decides it has made its point sufficiently. Kit talked for most of the first mile. About Cross's face when he read the ledger and the way the numbers looked in the judge's hands, like something that had always been true finally being held by someone with the authority to say so. About Dade's expression when Pruitt laid the envelope on the church step in front of everyone. About Weston, the Wichita lawyer, who had tried to become invisible from the second row and had very nearly succeeded. He talked about Crow, who had vanished before sunrise, and nobody who saw him go would say which direction he took, and probably nobody needed to know. He talked the way a person talks who has been holding quiet for a very long time and has discovered that the reason for holding quiet is finally completely gone. Nora let him talk. Colt walked beside her, and every few minutes his hand found hers and held it briefly and let go the way of something still being figured out, careful and certain, at the same time the way you hold something you are learning the shape of. The shack looked the same when they got back to it. The stitched flour sack over the window. The new fence post straight along the east line. The well with its new rope, the coil hanging neat on the hook Colt had fixed to the post. The rifle still leaning against the wall by the door where she had left it in her hurry. Kit noticed the rifle. He went inside, took a careful look around, came back out. It is the same, he said. What did you expect? He shrugged. I don't know. Something different, I guess. Nora looked at the shack, at the 40 acres of dry grass going gold in the fading evening light, at the line of willows in the distance marking the course of Calloway Creek, which had been running through this land before her father bought it and would run through it long after any of them were gone. It will be different, she said, just not all at once. That night, Colt moved his saddle blanket from the porch to the floor inside beside the door without making a production of it and without a word about it. Nora said nothing about it either. She made coffee in the morning and made it the way he drank it, black, and handed him the cup, and that was the whole of what needed to be said between them. Some things settle into place without needing to be announced. Kit slept on the cot and did not stir until the sun was fully up, the deep and trusting sleep of a child who has finally stopped waiting for something bad to happen. The kind of sleep that is itself a kind of answer to a question he had been asking his whole life. 2 weeks later in August, Colt dug the first trench. He started at the creek bank, where the water ran clear even in drought years, and he worked east toward the Lund property line with a long-handled spade and the patience of a man who understands that useful work takes the time it takes and not a minute less. Boone Lund came the second day with his own tools and took the next section without discussion. Henry Morrow came the day after, and the three of them worked in the early morning before the heat set in and knocked off at midday and started again in the late afternoon when the light went long. It was not fast, it was not elegant. It was three men with shovels and a simple idea in a creek that had been running through 40 acres of contested land for decades waiting for someone to open it up. By September, the Lund farm had water running from Callaway Creek through 40 yards of pipe and open channel into a holding cistern Colt had built against the north wall of their barn. The first morning it worked, Vera stood at the tap and turned it and watched the water come out and held her hand under it and did not speak for nearly a full minute. Then she went inside and made coffee and brought it out to the men and said, "That is a fair start." Then she went back inside before any of them could see her face. The Morrows got their connection in October. Old Amos Jenner's place took until the first frost because his land ran uphill from the creek, and the grade required more planning than the others. But it got done. By December, every family in Dustfield that had owed Warren Dade a debt they could not quite ever pay had clean, free water running to their property from the creek that crossed Nora Callaway's 40 acres. The thing Dade had tried to own. The thing he had built 6 years of lies around acquiring. Flowing now to every door he had once held closed. Nora never charged for it. Not a cent, not a condition, not an acknowledgement required in return. The water ran because water runs, and because a woman who had spent 6 years being told she owed something decided that the best use of the one thing she had that nobody could take from her was to give it away without keeping count. Kit started school in November. He was the fastest learner the school teacher in Dustfield had encountered in 11 years of teaching, which surprised no one who had watched him copy 30 pages of financial records in a man's locked office by borrowed lamplight while the man was at lunch. He read everything he could get his hands on. He stayed late at the Lund house 3 evenings a week, where Vera tutored him in arithmetic and geography, and he came home each time full of whatever had caught him. That evening, river systems, the mathematics of compound interest, which he found particularly instructive, given the recent history of Dustfield, the distances between cities he had never seen, and was already planning to visit someday. He fixed the loose step on the porch the week after he moved in without being asked. Just found the hammer and the right nail and did it one afternoon while Nora was at the bean patch. She came back and stepped on solid wood where there had been a rotten board and stood there for a moment looking at the repair. Then she looked at Kit eating his supper at the table inside and did not say anything. She went in and put extra cornbread on his plate. That was how they did things. In late October, Colt moved the rest of his gear inside. There was no conversation about it and no formal moment marking it. One evening, his saddlebag was on the shelf by the door, and the next morning it was still there. And the morning after that, and the shack which had been built for one person and had housed one solitary woman for 6 hard years, discovered that it held 3 without anyone feeling the walls too close. Some spaces are larger on the inside than they appear from the outside. The town clerk recorded a deed amendment in November. The property remained in Nora's name. Nora Mae Callaway, sole owner, 40 acres, Callaway Creek water rights included and specifically protected. Colt had insisted on it when Nora had suggested simply adding his name. She had told him he was the most stubborn man she had ever met in her life. He had said second most stubborn, "I have met you." She had not been able to find a counter-argument for that. December came cold, not the gentle kind of cold. The kind that sweeps in off the flat Texas land overnight and changes everything by morning, the kind that makes the dry grass go silver and turns every breath to mist and reminds you that winter has opinions about things and is not interested in hearing yours. The first real rain came on a Tuesday afternoon. Not soft rain, the other kind, the hard-driving kind that hits dry ground with enough force to splash back up, that turns the yard to mud in 10 minutes and fills the water barrels to overflowing and runs off the roof in sheets and makes the creek rise to its banks. Nora heard it start on the roof and lay still for a moment listening to it. Then she got up and went to the door. She opened it. She stood on the porch for one moment, feeling the cold edge of December rain on her face from across the yard. Then she stepped off the porch. The rain hit her like it had been waiting for her, specifically soaking her hair, flat in seconds, running down her face and neck, in the back of her collar, soaking through to her skin, in the way December rain does when it means business. She stood in the middle of the yard and turned her face up and let it fall on her. She did not close her eyes. Kit appeared at the door behind her. He looked at the rain. He looked at Nora standing in it. He stepped off the porch and walked out and tilted his face up the same way, and the rain ran down his face and he started laughing. The full, unguarded kind, both hands out, catching water, the laugh of a boy who has nothing left to be careful about. Colt stood on the porch in his blue work shirt and brown leather vest and watched them. "You are just going to stand there," Nora called. He did not move. "Enjoying the view," he said. She walked back to the porch. She reached up and took his hand and pulled, and he let himself be pulled without ceremony, and he stepped off the porch into the December rain on 40 acres of free ground, with the creek running full and clear in the distance. The three of them stood in the yard together. Kit was still laughing. Colt's hand was around Nora's, and hers was around Kit's. Three people in the rain, and the water ran down all their faces without making any distinction between them, without asking for anything, without keeping score. This is the story of Nora Calloway, a woman who dragged a dying stranger out of a dry riverbed because she could not leave Amanda D., and who stood on church steps in July with no shoes on her feet and read the truth out loud while the man who had spent 6 years trying to erase her sat in the front pew and heard every single word. She did not become someone different. She was always this person. The town spent 6 years deciding not to see her, which is not the same thing as her not being there. Towns change, not because of great men on horses or speeches that echo through the years, because one ordinary person decides on one ordinary morning that they will not look away. And because sometimes that person is a woman standing barefoot in a churchyard with a tin box and 15 pages of a boy's handwriting, and she just starts reading. And because a 13-year-old boy who was not supposed to know how to read learned every word from books left outside a stable door on cold winter nights by someone who asked nothing in return. Dustfield was never a perfect town, but after that summer it was an honest one, and the water ran free.